Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another conversation. You know, one of the things that we talked about last time we were together is that Jesus didn't call us to be fans. He calls us to be followers. But if we're honest, even followers have the tendency to drift every now and then. And one of the ways that we drift, most subtly, not the only one, and we'll talk about a few of them, but maybe the most dangerous that we have is tribalism. We live in a world that's constantly asking us to pick a side, whether it's a team or a brand or a tribe, whatever. And somewhere along the way, that mindset has its way into the church. We don't just follow Jesus. We end up following our church or our style or our preacher or our denomination or our movement. And before we realize it, loyalty to a brand starts to compete with loyalty to Christ. Paul saw this coming a long time ago. He wrote to a divided church and said, some of you say, I follow Paul, and others say, I follow Apollos, and others, I follow Cephas. And then he asked the most piercing question of all, is Christ divided? So today we want to talk honestly and have a conversation about tribalism and brand loyalty in the church, not to criticize so much, but more in line of trying to protect it. Because unity around Jesus has always been one of the church's greatest witnesses, and division has always been one of its greatest weaknesses. And I'm really excited and privileged to have the opportunity to have this conversation with a couple of guys who care deeply about the church, about its people, and have seen it from so many different angles. And there is I know we're just three people right here, but we have seen a vast array of the different types of tribalism and brand loyalty across this panel. And if we sat down and talked about it, we could probably take up the better part of 4 or 5 hours just sitting there and really diving into this just from a personal level from each of us. But we're not going to do that. We're not going to make you sit through that. But we'd love to have that conversation with you maybe one day. But I'm really glad to have these guys along with me. Of course, we're all friends. These are my buddies, and I love doing ministry with these guys. First of all, the student pastor for Northwood Baptist Church, Mr. Jeff Moss. Jeff, great to have you with us again.
Thanks, bud.
Little golf clap. There we go. There we go. And of course, from Together Church here in Moncks Corner, Pastor Robbie Foreman is with us. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you. Always good
Is
to
that
be
a
seen and not viewed.
yes? Is that a boss? Now, I mad preps to Jeff for the Carolina hat. Loving it. I like that one. That's a good one. I need to. I've got one around here somewhere. I might throw on my head here in just a second, but I can't split
The
loyalties
goat.
because I'm wearing my. I like the Jumpman. Nice, the Jordan logo. Although it would feel weird putting on a North Carolina hat when I'm wearing my North Greenville dad sweatshirt, so I won't do that. But Robbie, the yours is that Boston or is that Brooklyn?
It's Brooklyn.
It's Brooklyn. Okay, I can see it now. Yeah, it was really small on my screen, so I couldn't tell. But nice, bro. Oh, that's right, because you're a Dodgers guy. Yeah,
I can't hear you. I can't hear you over our world championship. What'd you say? I'm sorry.
You mean all the money you paid for it? Okay, but you know,
Yeah,
Hey,
that
don't hate.
that Otani check's coming due
Yeah,
real
it
quick.
comes with a big cost for sure.
Yeah, and then
And
y'all go out and get y'all go out and sign who was it? Was it Kyle Tucker to a
listen,
big contract?
we'll sign anybody that wants outrageous amounts of money
Yes,
at any
yes,
cost.
at any cost. There you
What a
go.
way to slide into tribalism.
That's right. That's right. Meanwhile, my Braves do it the old-fashioned way. They bring them up from the farm system. So
Yeah.
home grow our superstars. Nah, but so
but it,
let's. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
that leads to years of mediocrity and like one World Series in my lifetime. So
This is true.
two. Sorry, 95 and 2000. What was it? What was the last one?
2021.
Wow.
It's
And
okay.
Dodgers have won how many in that span?
How many have they bought?
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, listen, that's not what this is about. And
We're
there's a
not gonna
lot of guys.
beat.
There's a
We're
lot
not
of
gonna
guys
team
on
up
the
on
Dodgers
Robbie.
that I love too. But I'm a Braves guy. Have been since the '80s. So you want to talk about some feeble years?
Those
The
were it.
'80s were terrible. Anyway, we digress. Let's get back into what we were talking about, what our topic is for today. I want to start with a simple question here that sort of will open things up and get the ball rolling for us today. When you hear the word tribalism in context to the church, what comes to mind for you guys? Jeff, let's start with you today.
Honestly, like when I think about tribalism, uh, it, it creates some confusion a little bit for me because, and I think I talked with you off camera a little bit about this, but the whole idea of what does it actually look like to the extreme? Because I think some of us have it a little bit because, just think about like we're trying to get the message of the gospel out. And sometimes that gets connected with the name that's on a building and or a logo or but then there's also the other side of it where there's like you need to look like you know what you're doing like um I think if you went to a third world country and said, hey, let's go to this church and this logo, they're going to associate that with a pastor's name. Now I understand a little bit of that, like people, we follow people sometimes and forget Jesus. So but yeah, I'm interested to hear what Robbie has to say on all this.
Robbie, what's your take?
Well, I think we have to get a working definition to work from, right? So I would say church tribalism is when belonging to a group becomes way more important than following Jesus or becoming like Jesus, right? So I think we see it boldly in our culture today, right?
Yeah.
Boldly in our culture today because there is a loyalty. I think this is important to understand. It's okay to have church logos. I mean, we all have a church logo.
Mhm.
I don't know about your, ours tells a story. Ours is people think it's a piece of barbed wire, but it's not. It's a fisherman's knot. It's the tightest knot you can get. It's two ends coming together. They use it for survival and rescue, so we build ours with that. So we actually build our logo to be a evangelistic tool for people. But it's okay to have a logo. It's okay to have a name that's not like First Baptist. You can, just don't make it crazy names. Don't be a global church and be in a strip mall and you only, So I've seen that more than, oh, we're global. No, you're Main Street. But I think what has happened is there's been this shift over the last decade of we are loyal to a church more than we are loyal to Jesus. I would even venture to say that a lot of people that leave churches don't leave over doctrinal issues. They leave because they don't recognize home anymore. It
Right.
looks different, sounds different. This is why you see people, when a new pastor comes in, you'll see people leave. I found a stat. I thought it was really, really interesting. But 42% of people, 42% of American adults have switched religious affiliation at least once in their lifetime. Once in their lifetime.
Wow.
That was on proof. Now, guilty. I grew up Southern Baptist, and I was as Baptist could be. I married a Baptist girl who had a Baptist pastor for a father. My dad was a Baptist pastor. I went to a Baptist college. I lived on Baptist Road. And you know what they say about Baptist Road? Once paved, always paved. And so we'll let that stick. But perfect. But I grew up in the Baptist world. I don't hate Baptist. I mean, you are my Baptist
You're,
friends, right?
yeah, you're talking to two Southern Baptists
We
right here.
I mean, there's some theological points that we don't agree on. If we were to have those conversations, we wouldn't agree. But I'm not like, oh man, we should really take Tony and Jeff before a heresy board and call them out. It's not. It's just we agree on Jesus, which is the essential thing. And I
Yeah.
want my church to be a strong part of our community, but I also want your churches to be here too, because I'm more about the formation of it than I am about, hey, look what we're doing over here. So I remember growing up in that culture, and I left the Baptist church because it didn't feel like home. After college and after working in the Southern Baptist, it didn't feel like home. So, I went to non-denominational that we don't even know what we believe. That's where we were. But we have since found a home.
Honestly, non-denominational is just Baptist with a great social media program.
And good coffee. But then I moved into the missionary church where we have found home because it speaks our tone, it speaks our language. But what I love about our denomination, and not pushing it, but what I love about the missionary church is, man, we partner with all kinds of different people, and it's not about a brand. And I'll say this, and I love the missionary church, but man, we got a lot of awful websites in the missionary church. When our church was the best one, I'm like, oh, this is probably, but because it's about Jesus and about formation, so we just have to be super, super cautious when we're talking about tribalism. Is working from that definition is when belonging to a group becomes way more important than following Jesus.
Yeah. And I think tribalism shows up a bunch of different ways in our church, especially when you talk about it from the main street, the local level. And I want to talk about a couple of these, and we sort of have alluded to it already, but you have issues with style. Right? Style versus style. Well, I like this type of worship, or I like that kind of worship, or I like this preacher because he speaks this way, or I like this preacher because he speaks this way. And then we've sort of talked about the denominational side of it. Yeah, I can completely see myself as being, although I've always been a Southern Baptist. I was raised Southern. I wasn't raised Southern Baptist. Sorry, I didn't get saved until I was 27 years old. We were very small excursions into the church as a child. But I've always been a Southern Baptist. And when it was sat down and explained to me, I looked at the Baptist Faith and Message. And when I looked at it in accordance with the Bible, to me, when I looked around, that was of the mainline denominations, that was probably the one that, fit what I saw in the Bible the most. That's why I call myself a Southern Baptist, but I could honestly just see myself being non-denominational as well, or missionary church, as I've learned of their practices and their mission and their love of Jesus from Robbie, from you over the years, and just things like that. But one of the things that I think I want to dig into here just a little bit, I want us to talk about those things, and we don't have to talk about them one at a time, or split them all out and talk to them. But I'd like to key in on maybe tribalism surrounded by a pastor and tribalism surrounded by a style. Can we talk about those for just a few minutes, and some of the pitfalls that are there?
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Jeff.
I think you have to be careful not to build your own kingdom as a pastor. We got to check ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Are people following me, or are they following the Jesus in me? Like, there's some differentiation there, and like, we're in the context of relationships, but man, it always got me really queasy when I heard somebody say, "Oh, I really like the worship today." Okay, it wasn't about you, right? It's
Yeah.
about King Jesus. Did you participate in corporate worship together, or were you like, I don't like this song, so I'm going to sit here and show my visible disapproval, or that pastor went too long? I mean, goodness gracious, stories, right? Of like,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're not judging. We're just the pastors who see this. We see what everybody else doesn't see, right?
Right.
Like, hey, it's 12 o'clock. It's time. It's I don't care if the Holy Spirit's moving and somebody's about to come to know Christ, but I got to beat the Methodist to the Waffle House. So,
Mm.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's just what it comes to mind when it comes to, like, we follow people. We follow our what happens is we make it about us and we miss the heart of worship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to what we talked about last week, is being a fan versus being a follower. If you're a follower of Jesus, you could be dropped in any place. You could be dropped in any church environment, and if it's worshiping Jesus and preaching Jesus, you can find a connection there because it's about Jesus. It's not about a preference or anything like that. But a fan isn't. I don't believe a fan is that way. And that's what I really liked about us starting with that conversation last week first, is that it feeds into this one because, and we can talk about the church side of it and all of that, and we will. But first and foremost, if you're only a fan of Jesus, let me caution you this way, and this isn't every person, but if your main issue with a church is that the pastor goes too long, the music's too loud, or it's not the style that you like, I want to encourage you to check yourself. You may be a fan and you need to re-engage and be a follower, either again or for the first time. Because your church is not about your preferences. It's about being where God has called you to be able to plug in and do the mission that the church is doing and all of that kind of stuff. Just being a part of it. But is it okay to have a healthy pride or excitement, or I really didn't know what word to use there, but is it okay to have that sort of healthy enthusiasm or pride about your church?
Yeah. I love our church. I love it. I love our people. I think we have a very unique makeup. I'm proud of our church, not because what our church is doing, but because of what Jesus is doing through our church. I think that's the big difference. Like, it's okay to, I've been on both sides of this, right? And I think it's okay to have church with your logo on it. It's because you love it. Like, you can be a fan as long as you're following as well. Like, the fellowship is, again, the biggest piece. But I think it's totally okay to be super excited of your church. And sometimes I think we celebrate the wrong things. Like, attendance is great, but that doesn't measure depth.
No.
Baptism numbers doesn't necessarily represent depth. If you want to see the depths of where your ministry is, look at where your discipleship is happening.
Yeah.
How many ministries have you started outside of the church? Not your church, but your people have started outside of the church. What does that look like? So, I mean, I think there is, I wouldn't necessarily use the word pride, but I do think that there's a place to say, man, I really love my church, but I also love y'all's churches. I love your pastors, and especially at Calvary. I love Calvary's pastor.
Calvary folks love the Together Church pastor too.
Good,
So,
good,
yeah.
good. Maybe not after this podcast, but we'll see. They love me one podcast at a time.
But it's very transactional.
Transactional. But I do. I mean, I think you can be very proud of your church. And I want to go back to that other point that you are talking is, there are some preferences. I get it. Like, we are all wired differently. I worship differently. I grew up as a worship leader for a long time, and I have my preferences in worship. There's some Sunday mornings, if I'm being honest, there's a song that our worship team sings, and I'm like, not a fan of that song. But that song isn't to me.
Right.
But our church loves it. So I don't try to dictate my preferences as a pastor. It's kind of like, think about it this way. Going to Chuck E. Cheese you got invited to a kid's, I think we've all been at the birthday party at the Chuck E. Cheese, right?
Trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We go.
Oh yeah.
You get the cardboard pizza. You get the 5% soft drink, 95% sugar. You get the mascot Chucky. Looks like they just pulled him off the street because he was in a drug addiction program because he's skinny and his costume.
It literally looks like Five Nights at Freddy's.
And then you go sit around a table. We sing happy birthday to this kid. And then you walk out and you look at your spouse and go, that place was awful. Chuck E. Cheese looked awful. The pizza tasted like trash and the drink was awful. Well, your wife was going to look at you and go, that party wasn't about you.
About you.
It's not about you. And I think we approach church that way. Now, if you go to your church, and I want to say this, if you go to your church and you're just not connecting, yeah, go find another church. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's
Yep.
totally fine to find another church. And you can still be friends with the people in the church that you left.
Yep.
What?
Yeah.
That's hot
Come
off
on
the
now.
press. Because I've
Yep.
seen people go, oh, well, they don't attend here, so we can't, they're against us.
Yeah.
It
Tribalism.
just didn't fit. It didn't
Right.
fit for us. But I still pray for your church. I still love your church, but I have plugged myself over here because this is where I feel God has led me and this is what's working. So yeah, I mean, whether it's a hymn, my grandmother loved the traditional services. That's where she gave her life to Christ. Now my granddad in his later years found refuge, would not go to church, but found refuge in a contemporary service, which blew my mind, and gave his life to Christ. So, you know,
Yep.
you got
And,
a church for everybody.
I want to share. I want to key in on something you just said here, because it does show what a lot of this is about. Um, I had a family that had been a part of our church for years and years and years, even before I came there, and loved them to pieces. They loved on our family. They're just incredibly sweet, wonderful people. The husband served as a deacon in our church. I just absolutely love them to pieces. But there came a time where, and you could see that they weren't connecting at our church anymore. Something had changed, and if nothing anybody did, it was just things change, things happen, life situations change and all that kind of stuff. And they ended up going to another church. And they came back and saw us over the holidays, came back to a function that we had at Calvary. And man, I went up to him and I hugged him and I told him, I said, man, I'm so happy that you guys are plugged in where you are. And I'm so thankful that God is doing a work there. And I'm praying for you. And I mean, just, I think they were a little surprised by that reaction, but it's absolutely true. I don't want you to listen. If you are a sold out Christian, if you are a follower and you are in a church that you're not supposed to be at, and you know that, and God's calling you somewhere else, you need to go. You need to go. Because you're not going to be in God's will there. But the other side of that is true. If you leave a church because you have a disagreement or something like that, or you don't like the way something's going or something like that, and God's not calling you, I always tell people when they talk about thinking about leaving a church, whether it's our church or some other church, you need to pray. You need to pray. And you need to make sure that God is calling you, is releasing you from that church body that you are in right now. Because if not, you are going to be miserable when you go somewhere else. Oh, it'll be great for a while because it's feeding those initial desires or whatever. But once you get past that, give it a couple of weeks, and I promise you, it's all going to fade away, and you're going to be missing something because you're not where you're supposed to be. You're not where you're supposed to be.
And if you leave the church, it doesn't mean that other people have to leave the church.
Right.
Don't trauma bond
Exactly.
somebody else because you had an issue.
Hang on. Back up and say that again, because that was a good word, and I think I just stepped on it. Go ahead.
Don't trauma bond the people that leave. That happen because I see that happen, and also if we're going to be honest, I know sometimes a lot of tribalism produces it produces church hurt. It always has, because I heard it said this way: when group identity becomes sacred, reason becomes expendable. Because nobody, it's like, because this is who we are, and if I don't feel like I fit here, then I'm going to tell everybody else they don't fit here either. I'm going to get mad. And then we start questioning, going, how is that person still staying there after everything?
Yeah.
Maybe because the Holy Spirit leaves some there. I think in the scripture, there are different scenarios where God left some there. They were the remnant, right?
They were righteous remnant. Yeah.
And so just because you've been called to lead doesn't mean you pass that off on everybody else. And also, remember, if the church is wrong, I am 100% for churches. If you know facts, call it out.
Yep.
Go to the pastor, go to the board. Don't take it public on Facebook. Y'all stop with the Facebook stuff. Please, for the love of everything holy, stop going to Facebook. If you have an issue with your church, go to the church government. And if you go, well, I don't know what the church government is, I don't know who's in charge, then you probably just need to go to another church, because that's going to be an issue, because there's no accountability, right? But go with facts, go with understanding. And if you have that meeting and you feel like you weren't heard, and you have facts that were not validated, not opinions, facts that weren't validated, then it's time to go do another church and let the Lord take control, because God has it in control. Like if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, God's gonna handle that. He's got me. Like, but I also have put strong accountability around me to keep me in line, so I can't do
Yeah.
certain things.
Well, I'm gonna question you on that just for a second, because I believe it says in the second book of my preferences that if you have a problem with your brother and sister, you are to call them out on Facebook. You are to use social media and that. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're right. The book of Matthew tells us the way that we're supposed to handle an issue within the church. You go to your brother or sister and you confront them about it. You talk to them about it in a loving way. And if it doesn't work, then you bring it before your pastor.
Hey,
And
it's the most misquoted verse in the entire scripture. But when the Bible says, where there are two or more that gather in my name, that's not about church. We're gathered here, so God's here. God's always there.
yeah,
That passage is about confronting your brother, and to knowing that when there's a confrontation, you better recognize the Lord's in the room, and that's who leads the conversation,
yeah,
not opinions. We allow our emotions of how we feel to override logic. And this is what causes, because again, if our loyalty is to a pastor, I'm just going to be very upfront. I, at some point, am going to disappoint you. I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. And now my goal is I don't do anything intentional. I'm not trying to intentionally hurt people, but I'll just say, I'm okay to say it. I'm not worried about it, but, and I'm not trying to get political, but it's going to drag a little politics in here, but we can hit it and move. But there were people in our community that were upset about the whole Charlie Kirk thing, right? If your pastor didn't speak to it, you need to find a new church. Where you're not as upset. You're not as upset when they don't preach Jesus in the gospel every weekend.
I had people confront me about that.
Yeah. Well,
Why don't you preach on these kinds of things? I was like, listen, here's why. And I spoke about it in our church a couple of weeks ago. I said, here's the reason why I preach the way I preach. And I started it. I said this when we started the book of Romans, because I knew I was going to get to the second half of the Romans chapter 1, and there were some things we were going to have to confront, beginning in verse 18. But here's the thing. I told my people, I said, listen, all of these issues that we're talking about, the transgender issue, the homosexuality, all of this, that you're seeing on the news, abortion, the whole nine yards, all of it. Here's what it is. It's a symptom. It's a symptom. It's not the root cause. It's not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. You don't go to the doctor, a good doctor. If you find a doctor, if you go to your doctor and your doctor is just treating your symptoms and not trying to find the root cause of what's going on, you go find a new doctor. I'm not preaching the symptoms. I'm preaching the cure.
Well,
and the cure is Jesus.
I would add this, and because somebody said, I don't understand why you didn't mention it. I'm not mad about it. I just want understanding. I said, because I don't speak to things I don't know about. I don't speak to things. But here's what I do know.
Yeah.
The gospel, I know that. And I know that it changes. So I'm not a cultural expert. None of us are. This is, and I say it all the time, this is the hardest time to ever pastor.
Yeah.
If we spoke to every single issue that was happening, we would so quickly move away from the gospel and just speak social politics. But if, like you said, if I can get to the root of the issue, and the root of the issue, go back to Genesis chapter 3, when the trespasser came in. And let me tell you something, trespassers get in because we leave things unlocked.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason that Jesus says that the gates of hell will not prevail, because the enemy knows that he needs a secure territory. So I want to teach people not about necessarily uniformity. I just want to teach them about formation of the heart. Because here's my thing, and Jeff, I think you can speak to this a lot more in student ministry. I used to have parents get mad with me like, why aren't we doing true love weights? Why aren't we doing that? Why don't we have the highway patrol come in here and talk about drunk driving? Because if I can show your kids who Jesus really is, they will have zero desire to want to do those things.
Right.
Not guilt them into, hey, here's a car. You see it crumpled. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. But when you fall in love with Jesus, and that's important, so I don't want to misplay that. They need to know reality. But at the end of the day, parents, we have to disciple our kids. And if we can teach them to love Jesus and they can accept how much God really loves us, their desires change. And that's what we need to speak to. And that breaks down tribalism. Quickly breaks it down because it's more about formation than uniformity.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think that we have to remind ourselves of a couple truths, and one is that following Jesus means that there's going to be conflict. He said, "I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword." He divides. The Word of God divides. There's always going to be people who have different political views, but we got to get Jesus right, and we got to get the gospel right, and then. Paul talks about this, and here's the talking with students, talking with parents. Why aren't we doing these things? I can't tell you how many True Love events I did. When we were at Santee Circle, we did True Love Waits a little bit differently, and I absolutely loved it. It was almost like a rite of passage ceremony instead of let me sign a paper and get a little purity ring that is going to be a symbol that I might be able to give if I try really hard. That was what I did, and I mean, just lost it. But we treated it like hey, this is a family. Like the whole church was invited to participate. We had people come and speak over the kids as they went through this process, and if we try to say, well, why aren't we doing what other churches are doing, right? Man, real quick, that does not work. What you do, Robbie, at your church, if we tried to do it at Northwood or at Santee Circle, or you've got to know your people, but you've also got to, in the same way, contextualize the gospel to where they're at. So, if you're in a prison sharing the gospel, you're going to say things differently than you would to a bunch of preschoolers, right? Like it's very different, but that's the thing. Second thing I wanted to bring up too is my father-in-law and I. This is a cool conversation. We were talking off script a little bit about Calvinism and Arminianism and all that stuff, and that's usually the biggest hot button theological disagreement. But Brittany's grandfather was a Free Will Baptist pastor for 54 years. Planted a church in Columbia, built the church with his bare hands. Stood up in the pulpit to preach one Sunday as he was getting older, and there were handprints in the pulpit where he had been there faithfully serving that church. Crazy stuff. But so I sat down with them. Here I am, getting ready to go off to seminary and dating this guy's daughter. And I asked my father-in-law, I'm like, so help me understand this. And he said, which side do you want to take? I'm ready to argue either one. And I backed up like, whoa.
In season.
Yeah.
I'm not
season,
going
season.
debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking an honest question. But then that led to like me being confronted with, why don't I know more about these things? And so I went and investigated anyway. So the whole like which side and which side do you take? We have to be really careful that we help people understand what for themselves as they read the Bible and have their own convictions. Not this is what I believe, so you should follow what I say.
Right.
Like that's a flag right there, right? Hey, what do you think the Bible says about this passage? Well, I just finished up our Connect to Northwood, going through that process, and it's really cool. We're still trying to fine tune that. But at the end of it, they said, guys, you've gone through this for 4 weeks. You've been coming to church. After seeing who we are totally fine with you not being a part of our church. Like, if this isn't the church for you, God bless you.
Yeah.
Like, go find a place where God has called you to serve. And that's a hard thing to go and find a church. Being on that side of it is definitely difficult. Here's what Paul, my father-in-law, told me, and he talked about this. He called it a test of fellowship. He said that if I can break bread with somebody, let's say it's somebody who is a Lutheran, can I sit down at the table and enjoy a meal with them? Absolutely. I can identify them as a person. Am I going to open the Bible and read with them? Maybe, right? When I start talking doctrine, am I able to go worship with him? You got to be careful, right? Like, because you got to know the differences between denominations and things like that. But he talked about that we have to see people the way God created them, right?
Yeah.
He didn't create them. Oh, I dub this person a Methodist for life, right? Like they're going to go to the Methodist heaven, and then there's going to be the black heaven, and there's going to be the pro LGBTQ heaven, right? Like we have to be careful, right? Because some of those things, if we say that we identify with those things more than the gospel, then we might be following a false gospel.
Yeah, there's a human element to that, is that we are human. And not only that, in the very beginning, when God created man in his image, we don't get to say who is and who isn't an image bearer of God. Like every person we lay our eyes on, no matter where they are, no matter what they believe, what's part of the aisle they sit on, they are all image bearers of God. Now the question is, do they realize that yet? And I think that's where the tribalism conversation really has to begin taking a turn. A.W. Tozer, genius, right? Love anything that he writes is great. But Tozer said we are saved by believing, not by behaving. Believing always produces behaving. So that loyalty that we talk about, loyalty never ever leads to transformation. It's not faithfulness, right? Just being loyal. It's affiliation. It's who we belong to. And we belong to Jesus first. And that's why Dallas Willard would go on. He would say, the greatest issue facing the world today is whether those who are identified as Christians will actually become disciples.
Yeah.
If your loyalty is to Jesus, it's okay to be loyal to your church, but your loyalty should flow through your church to Jesus, not the other way around. I think sometimes we get so stuck on the church, where the church, we talk about healthy churches. The church is at its healthiest when loyalty is flowing, is having that flow to Jesus, and we don't get stuck, or even say it this way: the church is a means of grace, not an object of grace. And I think that is so important for us to understand that you and I, as pastors, as members of a congregation, we were never called to build churches. We were just called to simply make disciples, teaching them what we've known, not giving them political headline statements or speaking points, but sharing the gospel of Jesus. If you really want to know where your church stands on it, what does your invite culture look like at your church? Are people geared to just invite them to church and then it's up to the pastor to have to disciple? But what would it look like if we're talking about loyalty to Jesus? What if our first step in inviting people was not to church? What if our first step was inviting them into a conversation?
Jesus. Yeah.
To coffee, to dinner, to lunch, like Jeff's talking about, and get to know, like they get to know the Jesus that lives in me. And then work your way to church. I think we've got that backward, and that's where the loyalty is. Oh, you should come to our church because we do blah, 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 blah. I don't care what you do. What I'm looking for in a church, are you consistently making disciples that are making disciples? And I think that's probably, that kills tribalism. Because then when we were all given the same command, we just now do it through different denominations in different ways, but we have all been given the same command to make a disciple. And I will tell you, people have come here in our church and said, it's just not my thing. I've recommended them to your church.
Yeah.
Well, you might like this one. I'm okay with sending them somewhere else, because at the end of the day, Together Church is not here to compete with Northwood or with Calvary or with any other church in our community. But I do believe the scripture is that we're here to complete each other. And if you're a healthy, growing church, I I want to send them to a healthy, growing church. So I mean, I think that's super important for, as you know, as we shape this conversation of how are we as pastors, as churches, and then as followers of Jesus, what idol needs to die for our loyalty? Because the church can be an idol, but what are we doing to help our loyalties towards Jesus and everything that he is?
I agree. I want to take. I think we've covered a lot and sort of even went in some directions that I wasn't even anticipating. And but I think this has been a great talk here to help understand that really. I think what it boils down to is this, if I may, and this is sort of off the cuff a little bit. We're engaged in a culture that is all about identity. I identify with this, I identify with that, this side of the aisle, that side of the aisle, this side of this issue, that side of the issue, and that becomes our identity. I used to tell it to young people, and I would love to have gotten Jeff's take on this, but I think we lost him. He was having some connection issues there for a little bit. But I used to tell, when I was in youth ministry for years, I used to tell my students, listen, your identity is not in whatever relationship you have going on right now. Your identity is not wrapped up in any of those things. Your identity should be wrapped up in who you are in Jesus Christ. That's the most important thing. But I think that is part of this whole tribalism thing. We have people that are identifying a particular way. We have churches that are trying to identify themselves a particular way. We have pastors who are trying to identify themselves a particular way so that they draw a particular congregation or a particular type of crowd to push along what their vision of the church is supposed to be instead of what God's vision of the church is supposed to be. The church doesn't belong to a brand. It doesn't belong to a personality. It doesn't belong to a denomination, no matter what anybody else says, or a network or a movement. The church belongs to Jesus. And the moment our loyalty to anything, whether it's a style or a system or a name, again, we've said it so many times here today that it when it rivals our loyalty to Christ, then we've missed the heart of what the gospel is really about. Unity does not mean uniformity. It means that it doesn't mean we all worship the same way. It doesn't mean we all preach the same way. It doesn't mean we all organize the same way. It means that we agree on who the church is and why, for whom we exist. Paul's question still confronts us today from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Is Christ divided? And if our words, our posts, our comparisons, our attitudes suggest that he is, then it's not the church down the street that needs correcting. It's our hearts. It's our hearts that need the correcting. So maybe the challenge isn't to love our church less, but to love the body of Christ more, to celebrate what God is doing beyond our walls.
I think we could even say it with churches. Churches are meant to help people follow Jesus, not replace him.
Yeah.
And if we will fall more in love with Jesus, it's okay to love your church. We said that.
Yeah.
But the more you fall in love with Jesus, the more you fall in, and I think this is important. The more I love Jesus, the more I love his church. And the more grace I have towards the church and the broken people. Because you think about Paul, the trajectory of Paul. Paul starts out in his writings, I'm a sinner. By the end of Paul's life, the closer he got to Jesus, he went, I am the chief of all
of sinners. Yeah.
And the closer I get to Jesus, the more grace I have for people in the church, because I realize how much grace I need. And the fact that Jesus died for me, man, if he can save me, he can save anybody.
Yep. Again, I know I'm centering a lot of things around the book of Romans, but that's where a lot of my study is right now.
You're hanging out.
Yeah, but Romans 1, Paul gives this, after he talks about the issue that the Roman culture had with sexual immorality. He gets towards the end of that around verse 15. He says, and oh, by the way, it's not just that. it's greed and hatred and anger and all of these other sins that there's not one of us that could look at that list and say, yep, I'm clean. I don't have that issue. That's just not true. When we understand truly who we are and where we come, I think I'm gonna say this, and then then we'll close, because this goes away from the tribalism thing just a little bit. I think this happens, and we're done for the day. I think with all of the sort of, and again, this kind of comes from my Southern Baptist background. Robbie, you probably can attest to this as well. I know Jeff can. We've had so many over the years ways of presenting the gospel, right? There's been evangelism explosion. There's been the Romans Road to Redemption. There's been, which I particularly like. I like that for this one particular reason. There was one in the Southern Baptist churches for years. It was called Faith. And it was great tool, for the time. Times have changed, and it's not that kind of tool anymore. But here's the thing. And I think where a lot of the miss, and the point that I'm trying to get to is this: we try to explain people's need for Jesus without showing them their depravity, without showing them who they are and where they come from, where we all come from. And the truth of the matter is that if we just understood how much Christ loved us as his creation, but as the church, the big C, worldwide, global church, if we just understood where he brought us from individually and how he's glued us together through his love and his grace and his mercy and his call to reach the rest of the world, all of this other stuff would just become so small and so petty, and we wouldn't worry about it. And we just get about the business of forgetting about all of this tribalism, all of, I love this type of worship. I love my pastor because he does. We get rid of all of that and really just love Jesus and want to see other people saved. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, then I want to encourage you to do something for us. Like, subscribe, share it, tell people about it. Donate money, whatever it is. We'll take anything at this point.
That come from?
But
That was unscripted,
really
FYI.
Yeah, completely. But we really do hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that the conversations that we have here together on this podcast between the three of us lead to conversations between you and the people in your sphere of influence, whether they're lost, saved, walking away, engraved or entrenched in fandom instead of fellowship. Listen, this is a great way to sit down and start having these conversations. We live in a culture where we have lost the art of being able to sit down and talk to people because for so many reasons. But we need to get that back. And that's sort of one of our, we're going to fly this flag and have these conversations together and try to encourage you to do the same. But if you don't mind dropping us a like or a subscribe or share, whatever it is, whatever platform you're on, we would certainly appreciate it. And until next week, when we get together and we sort of continue this conversation, when we get into talking about the traditional church and the church plant, we'll talk about, Robbie, your Together Church started in 2019. Is that correct?
2019.
So as of right now, you guys are getting up on 7 years of being a church, a congregation together. My church is celebrating their 80th year this year. So we're going to talk about the differences between the traditional church and the church plant. And it's going to be a great conversation. Thanks for being here. We'll talk to you soon.